Hello everyone, welcome back to another video on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about the 4th episode of The Acolyte, which has just hit Disney Plus, and I've been having a lot of fun talking about this series on the channel, mainly because I think of all these Star Wars series as of recently, this one inspires the most speculation out of me as an audience member because of the way this mystery is deepening episode by episode. I think that this show and this series and this mystery at least has become much more complex by this point than it was at first in those first 2 episodes, and so I have a lot of theories, a lot of ideas of how this series is going to fit in the larger Star Wars universe, and I have some ideas about how this series could potentially break Star Wars canon or how it could avoid breaking canon in these next 4 episodes, which I'll get into all that stuff here in this video. So if you haven't seen episode 4 of The Acolyte, I'm going to be talking about full spoilers for everything that happens in this episode, along with my theories that is going to happen in the next 4 episodes. I'm very excited to get into this, so let's just jump into it. So after the flashback episode that we got last week, exploring, I guess, at least Osha's perspective on what happened 16 years ago, we are now back in the present time and seeing multiple storylines going on. We're essentially seeing what the Jedi think of this entire situation and the potential cover-up that they're kind of, I guess, putting into motion at this point in the story, which I do think is very interesting. We also have May going after KELNACCA in this episode on Kofar, and we also have a fellowship of sorts of a bunch of Jedi going after May to stop her from killing KELNACCA in this episode, and lots to talk about here. And I want to start off with the Jedi, I guess, mini council that they have in this episode led by VERNESTRA, because I think that the cover-up that they're kind of introducing, at least the idea of a cover-up in this, is very interesting. We of course know that the Jedi Council cannot learn about the presence of a Sith character in this series because of the line of dialogue that we had in The Phantom Menace saying that the Sith had been extinct for a millennium. So we know that 1,000 years have gone by without the Jedi knowing about the Sith rising, but of course the Sith did rise in this point of the timeline. We know that the Sith have a presence in the timeline because, there's Darth Plagueis and there's Sidious, rising up, in the events after this film. So we know that the Sith have a presence in the Star Wars universe, but how did they hide all these years? Well, we have, this little mini council being formed to investigate who trained May in the Jedi arts, because she, of course, has all these skills. She's killing all these Jedi. She is clearly capable of the things that the Jedi are capable of. So who trained her? Is it a former Jedi? Who is involved in all this stuff? They don't know that a Sith is involved in this, especially when we have the Jedi encounter the Sith, and one of them literally says, "What is that?" They don't know what a Sith is at this point in the timeline, which is a very great moment. I'll get into the introduction of the Sith later in this video, but in general, I think that the Jedi, introducing the idea that they don't want to tell the Jedi Council about this because if it gets out that a former Jedi or somebody who is trained in the Jedi arts is able to kill other Jedi, their political standings in this world will definitely take a hit. And that is a further exploration of what George Lucas set up in the prequels, which is the idea that the Jedi are so, I guess, blinded by their hubris. They are so blinded by their egos and by, their standing in the world of politics in Star Wars that they let the Sith grow under their nose after all these years. They let it all happen directly underneath them. They were too ignorant to the fact that they rose directly underneath their nose to essentially wipe them all out in Revenge of the Sith, which is a great storyline that was, kind of played out through the prequel stories. And so to further explore that in this series, I do think is an interesting idea. And it does make sense to have the Jedi, I guess, cover up the idea that there is a Jedi killer in this in some sort of ways. It makes sense for all that to happen. I do think that all the characters that are on Kofar in this fellowship of sorts, they all need to die because they directly saw this Sith character. I think the next episode is going to be an absolute slaughter, at least of all the non-essential characters. There's a lot of Jedi that are introduced in this episode that are very much cannon fodder. You're definitely going to see them all be murdered brutally in the next episode, which I cannot wait to see. But in general, I think that this episode did tee up the idea of a cover-up of this entire situation from VERNESTRA in particular, which I think that this character is going to be very key when it comes to these next 4 episodes into covering up all these dark things that happen along with Soul. Whatever that happened on Brandok that we didn't get to see in the last episode is going to very much come into play in, I believe, the 7th episode because of how they kind of blocked out the directors of these 8 episodes. Of course, the first 2 episodes were directed by the showrunner Leslye Headland. The last episode was directed by Kogonada, who is also going to be directing, I believe, the penultimate episode of the series, so I'm sure that we'll get to see a lot of flashbacks again to see, I guess, the perspective of May and the Jedi when it came to those events 16 years ago, which I cannot wait for that episode because I thought last episode was just really great with the flashbacks. But in general, I think that this series is teeing up an interesting idea of where we're going to go in the future with how the Jedi cover this up to keep the Jedi Council ignorant of the rise of the Sith. But like I said, we also had the storyline of May and QIMIR going on Kofar to find KELNACCA, and I will say that this episode I did have a lot of issues with. I do think that this is one of the more flawed episodes of the series, and I think by the ending of it, if this show keeps on doing stuff like this, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed by the end of it, mainly because this is the second time that we've had a character like Carry-On Moss's Indara, and now we have KELNACCA, where they're unceremoniously killed, or I guess even more so unceremoniously killed when it comes to KELNACCA's character in this episode. Indara at least got a really cool action sequence, and I know we're going to see more Carry-On Moss in the flashbacks in the 7th episode. Cannot wait to see that, and I guess that's going to have to be the case with KELNACCA in the flashbacks as well, but KELNACCA didn't even get a fun action sequence. KELNACCA was just killed off screen by the Sith character, which was very disappointing. I saw it coming because of how they were kind of staging that and how May decided to go against her plan this entire time, which I'll get into her, I guess, flip-floppy motivations here in a second as well. But I do think that this storyline in general was the part that I was a little bit iffy on the most part in this episode. I don't think that May's, I guess, motivations are very clear at this point in the series, mainly because they're still keeping that a secret. I think if we did learn more about May's perspective on the events 16 years ago in this episode, I think it could have cleared up a lot of stuff, but the idea that she saw Osha in the 2nd episode and knows that Osha is now alive, and she is kind of, figuring out all these things, and it's changing her perspective, and now she doesn't think that she needs to follow this Sith Lord or whatever plan that she has to kill all these Jedi, which is definitely a deal that she made with this Sith character. It's not a straight up like revenge story from Osha's perspective. She's not necessarily being forced to do this stuff, but she is making a deal with the devil essentially to take out all these Jedi. But of course, Osha being alive changes everything for her, so she decides in this episode to turn herself into KELNACCA and ties up QIMIR in this episode. And I do think that motivation, that flip-flop, happened very abruptly, and I think that honestly could have been fixed very easily in the 2nd episode. When it came to Osha and May seeing each other for the first time in that episode, I think that moment could have hit a lot harder, and I even said that in my video a couple weeks ago, because, they see each other, Osha fires a couple of shots and completely misses, and then May drives off. I think even if, Osha fell to her knees and said that I couldn't do it, I couldn't take the shot, I couldn't take May out because I have this connection with her, or if I did confront her, I probably would have killed her, or maybe hammer home that idea that these two characters interacting with each other, meeting each other, really would mean vastly different things to each other. It could have the idea that, Osha could be filled up with rage and kind of be what May has been all these years, and be filled with revenge because she thinks that, May caused the death of all her family in the past. Or when Osha confronts May, she becomes very passionate. She kind of goes in the route that Osha has been, which is a much more peaceful route, and she could, allow Osha to take her down, or whatever the case may be. It could again be that mirroring of duality with, the yin and yang symbols that we've seen that the witches used in the last episode, and then we see, markings on the wall that KELNACCA has been studying all these years. And so I find all these things to be there presently in the story. I just don't think that those storylines have been hit as hard as they could have. And then there's also the fact that this is very much half an episode. This is the shortest episode so far in this series, which felt extremely abrupt, especially when we got the amazing introduction of the Sith character. I loved how this thing just kind of floated down in the background behind Osha and struck its lightsaber and blew everybody away with the Force. I loved the introduction of this character so much, and the episode ended in a very abrupt way. I saw it coming because I saw this episode is very short, and I heard it had a cliffhanger. I think this episode is directed by Alex Garcia Lopez, and like I said, these episodes are kind of directed in 2-episode blocks, and so the next episode is very much, tied with Alex Garcia Lopez's vision of whatever he had for this episode. And it feels like he was given 1 episode's worth of storyline that they very much just cut in half at this point of the story, which kind of feels similar to the first 2 episodes with Leslye Headland as well. And so I think that maybe this series was a 6-episode show at first, and maybe a couple of them were combined or at least split up to make it 8 episodes. I hate when Disney does this. They do this a lot with a lot of their Disney Plus shows. But either way, once we get the last half of this, I think I can have a more informed opinion on what Alex Garcia Lopez did with these episodes, because from what it seems like so far, I do think that this was one of the more underdeveloped storylines, where we had a lot of character shifts that happened off screen, or I guess, it happened without having more of a ceremoniously impactful scene that tied these characters to make the decisions that they make. But either way, we still have half this episode that we haven't seen yet, so it's kind of hard to judge it at this point as well. But let's get into the theories that I have about this show so far. And I did watch The Phantom Menace last night to kind of clear out some things from the last episode. A lot of people said that the last episode broke canon. I will debunk some of that stuff later on in this video, but I'll get into that in a second. Let's talk about the more fun theories that I got off of this episode itself, which is, who in the world is this Sith Lord? Or is this even the Sith Lord that we've been looking for? Or is this the apprentice of a potential Sith Lord? Is that, master of this apprentice, Darth Plagueis at this point in the timeline? We could potentially see that as well. And I said in the last episode, I think that's when we get the, further backstory of what happened 16 years ago on Brendok. I do think that, the Jedi had nothing to do with the death of the witches. I think they're being framed potentially. I do think, at least my theory is, that the Sith Lord had something to do with the events on Brendok. There was 4 perspectives of that event. There's Osha's perspective that we saw last episode. There's May's perspective that we haven't seen just yet. There's a Jedi's perspective, and I think that there is a 4th party involved in that, which is the Sith Lord. There's also some people speculating that Coral could be the Sith Lord, or at least this masked character in this episode. I don't think that is the case because I don't know what Coral's motivation would be to kill the rest of her coven. I think that would be extremely out of pocket for that character to do. I don't like that idea, but it is a theory worth mentioning. I do think that it is very possible that QIMIR could be the Sith character in this episode because, of course, May strung him up in this episode and, had all the conversations. What's really pushing has been, at least from the very beginning, has been pushing May to do all these things, to be following the rules that the Sith has set, and has been very suspicious from the very beginning. Manny Jacinto plays QIMIR, and I really like him as his character because he's a very weaselly character. He's very untrustworthy and just suspicious character. So I think he plays either a really great red herring, or if he ends up being this Sith character, great. I think he has been a really interesting presence in this show and how he's been manipulating May on the side. I do think that it is probably my theory at this point. I do think that this character is probably the Sith Lord, especially with the way that the events played out in this episode with him being strung up and, knowing May's motivations, and maybe he could have, got himself down from the ropes because he is the Sith Lord. He is strong with the Force. He can possibly get himself out of this situation, knows how to get to KELNACCA first, kills KELNACCA, and then is there to freak everybody out at the end of the episode. I think that is probably the most likely theory that I have, at least. But really, my flagship theory that I have for this series in general is the fact that this Sith character that we saw in this episode is not the Sith Lord. It is just the apprentice of Plagueis or somebody like that, because of the events of the last episode hinting that Osha and May were immaculately conceived in the similar way that Anakin was in the prequels. And I know a lot of people say that this is a canon-breaking thing that makes Anakin less special, so let's just jump into why I think that these people are saying this and why I think that they are wrong in saying this. So I took a lot of notes watching Phantom Menace last night, so you can check out my Letterboxd review. It's a very long Letterboxd review where I talk about all this stuff, but let's just get into it with some of the quotes that I thought were interesting from the Phantom Menace. And this is, of course, what the Jedi Council has to say when Qui-Gon pleads his case to the Council when it comes to Anakin's potential training as a Jedi.
I've encountered divergence in the Force.
A divergence, you say?
Located around a person?
A boy. His cells have the highest concentration of midichlorians I have seen in a life form. It is possible he was conceived by the midichlorians.
You refer to the prophecy of the one who will bring balance to the Force. You believe it's this boy?
I don't presume to.
But you do. Revealed your opinion is.
So there's a couple things about these quotes that I want to get into, mainly the fact that there are several qualities that Qui-Gon sees in Anakin that makes him think that Anakin is the chosen one. It's not just the fact that he was immaculately conceived, which is alluded to in the Phantom Menace, but it's also said that he has very high midichlorian counts. He's very empathetic towards other life forms, and he also uses the Force very strongly when it comes to the pod racing scene. He's a very strong connection to the Force in general, and so all those factors make Qui-Gon think that he could potentially be the chosen one. And when Qui-Gon goes to the Council with all of these pieces of evidence, the Council doesn't immediately agree with Qui-Gon that he is the chosen one. And if it was the fact that if somebody was immaculately conceived, then that person is guaranteed to be the chosen one. That is not the case, because the Jedi Council, including Yoda and Mace Windu and everybody else involved, doesn't buy it at first. They are very skeptical of Anakin. They think, okay, maybe you're making a very strong case, but him being immaculately conceived is not a necessary thing for him to be the chosen one. It's all these things in combination that make Anakin special, and it doesn't take it away the fact that, somebody else could have been immaculately conceived in the past. It is not a requisite for the chosen one, and it isn't even the first time. They don't even say that this is the first time that this has ever happened. It is just a very interesting idea that this character has all these qualities, and maybe they are the chosen one because of it. But I think what vindicates the Acolyte the most of everything that I've mentioned so far actually is in Revenge of the Sith, in that very famous scene where Palpatine has a conversation with Anakin about Darth Plagueis the Wise and how Plagueis learned the ability to manipulate the midichlorians to create life, alluding to the fact that maybe Plagueis passed it down to his Padawan being Palpatine, and Palpatine was the one who created Anakin all those years ago inside the body of Shmi Skywalker, which I think is a very interesting point that is never confirmed in the prequels. I think it is an idea that George Lucas even said himself is up for interpretation. And so if anything, if my theory is correct, if the witches use dark magic to create life in these children, and maybe the Sith is involved, maybe they sought the help of these Sith, and maybe Plagueis is that Sith character, it could even vindicate the fact, and it could confirm the idea that Anakin was created by Palpatine, which would confirm a long-running theory that people have had for decades. And I think that's really cool. If this series confirms that Anakin was created by the Sith as a plot to take out the Jedi, I think that is a really cool way to reveal that in this prequel series that takes place 100 years with all these characters that we've never met before, that feels disconnected, that feels like its own standalone thing, but also is very important to the Skywalker saga and to the Star Wars series, the Star Wars universe in general. I love that idea, and if that does end up happening, if that is the case by the end of the series, I think that's, a lot of people feel very dumb for thinking that this show ruins the Star Wars canon, because I think this could confirm something that is really cool in the Star Wars universe. Or it could not do any of that, and I'm completely wrong. I guess that is also very much the case here, but like I said in my last video, this is a mystery series, and I think that the ending of a mystery series will really be the make or break for that series. If this show does not end well, if the last 4 episodes just completely fall apart, then I will really change my tune on a lot of this, because I think that the mysteries are set. It is a mystery box that is getting deeper and deeper as time goes on, getting me to speculate even more and more, and if it doesn't stick that landing, it could ruin everything that came before. And so, again, I'm very invested at this point in the Acolytes, and quite frankly, I feel very bad for you if you're not as invested as I am. I'm having a lot of fun with the show. I don't think it's the greatest show in the world. Like I said, there's a lot of flip-floppy characters and motivations that don't fully make sense quite yet, and yeah, sure, there's some awkward moments. YORD is a complete dork, but I think he's a dork on purpose. The show is very much flawed. They killed off the Wookiee Jedi unceremoniously. I'm still not a fan of that, but I'm still having fun speculating about Star Wars again. And so I'm definitely very curious to hear your thoughts on the Acolyte episode 4. What are your theories? I'm very curious to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. Who do you think the Sith character is? Like I said, my bet is on QIMIR, who is the Padawan of Plagueis. That is my guess. Probably not true, but I'm just throwing it out there. Comment down below, and if you did enjoy this video, make sure you guys leave a like and subscribe to the channel to see more reviews just like this one. Like I said, I'm having weekly reviews for the Acolyte. I also have movie reviews coming out every single week. I just reviewed Inside Out 2, and I'm going to be reviewing, I think, Kinds of Kindness this upcoming week, because it is releasing in limited fashion on Thursday, and so I'm very excited to watch that movie and to talk about it here on the channel as well. So thanks everybody for watching. Like I said, comment down below, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I hope to see you all in my next one.